It's been a little while since I've uploaded my last video. I know, guys, I apologize. I've been inconsistent, but what better way to come back than with a crazy story? And this one is not just crazy. I think it's actually the worst story I ever read. This case just has so much in it, and there's just so much going on, and it's not for the faint of heart. So just a heads up, if you guys are, a little bit, spooked by these kinds of things, maybe this isn't for you. But if you're not and you think you can handle it, well, then grab a cup of coffee, grab a snack, grab a buddy, and let's begin. So this story starts off in 1999 in Hong Kong, and as you know, Hong Kong it's a pretty big capital place. There's a lot of commerce, there's a lot of trade, there's a lot of people. Now our story starts with a 14-year-old girl named Ah Fong, and she walks into a police station one day. She's scared, she's shaking, she's distraught, and the police are wondering what's wrong with her, because judging from her appearance, something clearly is. Ah Fong told police that she was being haunted by the ghost of a dead woman, and it had been haunting her for weeks. At first, I'm sure you can imagine, the police laughed and thought she was joking or just crazy. But Ah Fong then went into detail about the ghost that she was seeing. It was a dead woman with electrical wire wrapped around various parts of her body. Her clothes were torn and ragged, and she was covered in blood. Now, if I were the police and I was hearing something like this, yeah, I would think, what exactly is going on here? Is this girl okay? Is she just kind of making things up for attention? Is she on some sort of medication or maybe off of it? And that is exactly what the police thought. Police thought that Ah Fong was simply on drugs, as she did have a history of hanging out with the wrong people, and we'll get into that, don't worry. But the police refused to believe this young girl about her story. That is, until she told them she was part of the murder, and she knew exactly where the body was hidden. Now, before we get too into it, guys, I want to first thank today's sponsor, HelloFresh. While I've been away, I've been using HelloFresh for quite a while now, and it's just made my life so much more convenient, and cooking at home is way more fun, affordable, and just easy. HelloFresh delivers fresh, quality produce from the farm to your door in less than a week, allowing you to enjoy the delicious flavors of the season right from home. With foolproof and step-by-step recipes, you'll enjoy amazing cooking experiences with a lot less stress. Plus, HelloFresh cuts back on time spent in the kitchen with meals ready in about 30 minutes or less. HelloFresh also offers veggie, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome meals to make it easy to stick to your goals no matter your diet. With easy-to-update delivery options, you can get HelloFresh delivered to you with just a click. And plans are flexible, so they work with your ever-changing schedule. With HelloFresh, I'm able to get more done in my day instead of wondering what's for dinner. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGTerryAUG16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 surprise gifts. It doesn't get any better than that, so what are you waiting for? That's POGTerryAUG16, just copy and paste that code or use my link below. And now, let's get back to the story. According to Ah Fong, this ghost of a woman who was haunting her would not stop until she confessed to the crime and brought justice to her. Police then followed Ah Fong to the crime scene, and what they found was truly disturbing. Inside an old apartment building, the officers were stunned when they walked in. The entire apartment was filled with Hello Kitty dolls, pillows, toys, blankets, even curtains. Like, you would not believe this apartment. Like, whoever lived there, you can tell they had an obsession with Hello Kitty like none other. But one particular Hello Kitty piece stood out. It was a large mermaid Hello Kitty doll, and what police found inside would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Now, let's rewind a bit and find out how all of this came to be. The victim's name was Fan Man Yi, and from childhood, she had endured a difficult life. Fan had grown up in an orphanage after having been abandoned by her parents as a baby, and at the age of 15, she was kicked out of the orphanage because of an age restriction. As a 15-year-old girl, can you imagine getting kicked out onto the streets from an orphanage with no way to go about going on with your life? Like, I just can't imagine, what are girls at that age, or anyone at that age, supposed to do at 15 with no education, nothing, no one to support you? I just can't imagine. And naturally, with no education or anyone to support her, Fan ended up doing whatever she could to survive. She ended up selling her body for money and ran with the wrong crowd, and she even developed a addiction in the process. Now, this is something that I just feel is really sad, but it's a real thing in many places of the world. There are lots of women all over the place that grow up with no support structures in their life and no real way to make money except for, selling themselves and not knowing that they can do something else and they can do better. But like I said, they don't have anyone there to support them. They don't have anyone to teach them and educate them and show them a better way. A few years later, Fan is now somewhat adept at surviving on her own, and now she works at a nightclub as a dancer. She did struggle with drugs at this time, but it was a better situation overall than when she was just a 15-year-old girl thrown out on the streets. Fast forward a few more years later, Fan would eventually meet her husband, and 1 year later, they would have a son together. Now this all sounds good and nice, and you might think that, okay, things are finally starting to look up. Well, except her husband was also an addict, and that only caused further problems and made it harder on their relationship. There would be constant complaints from neighbors who would hear them fighting all the time, and you could tell that household, something was up, and the baby would be crying and people could hear that too. But one day, Fan decided to try and make a change. She decided to get a job again. After being pregnant, she wasn't really working much, but she decided to get a job again now that her son was born, and this time at another nightclub. Fan also even attempted to fight her addiction and turn over a new leaf. Things were finally looking up for her. That is, until one day, a man came into the club. His name was Chan Man Lok. He was a 34-year-old member of the Triads, which, if you don't know, is a very dangerous and notorious gang. Man Lok took a liking to Fan, and it wasn't long before he became one of her frequent clients. Now, I'm sure you'd agree, Triads gang member, taking a liking to her, becoming a frequent client, yeah, this has trouble written all over it. It was only a little while later until Fan was now back into her addiction. On top of her husband also dealing with his addiction and the baby to take care of, Fan did something that would seal her fate forever. After one of her sessions with Man Lok, she secretly stole 4,000 Hong Kong dollars from his wallet. That's roughly about 500 USD, but that's still a lot of money, and back then, it was even more. It wasn't long until Man Lok found out. And once he did, not only did he demand she pay back the 4,000, but he would tack on an additional 10,000, like for tax. Fan was able to get the 4,000 and return it back to Man Lok immediately, but she needed time to get the rest. And I think that makes sense because, she stole the money because she didn't have money to begin with, so of course she's going to need more time to get another 10,000. But unfortunately for Fan, time is another thing she didn't have. Instead of waiting for her to get the rest of the money, Man Lok sent 2 of his henchmen to kidnap Fan and bring her to him. These 2 men were Lung Shin-cho and Lung Wai-lun, and were also involved in the Triads gang. Man Lok had Fan taken to an old apartment building and kept there. Here, he would invite numerous clients over to use her as they pleased. All the while, Man Lok would be collecting all the profits. This was basically Man Lok's way to sort of remake the money that he lost. I guess he didn't want to wait, so he would force her into working, for him and collecting the money that way. But things get even worse. Eventually, this still wasn't enough for Man Lok. He wanted to hurt Fan even more, and so he moved her to the 3rd floor of another apartment building and gagged her with dirty rags so she couldn't scream. The 3 men tied her hands and feet with electrical wire and then began to beat her. And this went on for weeks as the 3 men took turns torturing Fan over and over again. Now remember the 14-year-old girl, Ah Fong, who came in at the beginning and told the police about everything? Well, this is where she comes into the story. At the time, she was working as an escort for Man Lok while also dating him. I know, actually disgusting. As if this guy couldn't get any worse. Now Ah Fong was made to take part in some of these beatings because she was close to Man Lok, but what's worse is the beatings she recalls watching. There would be times when Man Lok and his goons used whatever means they could to hurt Fan, ranging from burning the bottoms of her feet with hot plastic so she couldn't walk, to being strung up and used as a human punching bag, to even having spices rubbed into her wounds to cause further pain. Now Ah Fong, who basically was forced to take part in some of these, told the police that she thought they were all just playing games and didn't realize what was actually going on. Probably because she was so desensitized and disconnected with reality, she couldn't even realize what was actually happening. Now I want you guys for a moment to just kind of put yourself in Ah Fong's shoes. You're 14 years old and you're working as an escort and you're dating this 34-year-old Triads member. It's such a bad situation, and you're being exposed to things like this. It's just, I feel like we can kind of sympathize with Ah Fong and we can realize that she truly was also a victim in all of this. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts, so leave a comment down below and let me know. After about a month of all of this, Fan finally succumbed to her wounds. It happened during a night when all three men were out partying. They left Fan with her wrists tied together, hanging from the ceiling. And due to the severe trauma and mental duress, Fan's body had finally let go, and she was finally free from her captors. But the story isn't over yet, because Man Locke would come home and realize this, and now he has to do something about the body. And if you think this situation couldn't get any worse, well, it does. Desperate to get rid of the body, but also a crazy person, Man Locke and the two other men did something that would make headlines across nations. They cut the body into pieces, boiled them, and then threw them away with the garbage. Yeah, it's sickening. They just disposed of the body that way and just threw out the remains in the trash, in the everyday trash that gets taken by the garbage men. But this next part is truly horrifying. As for the head, after boiling it, they stuffed the remaining skull inside an oversized Hello Kitty mermaid doll, where it was kept inside the apartment as a souvenir. Some of the organs were also allegedly kept in plastic bags inside the fridge. So if you couldn't tell by now, these men, they're all beyond crazy. Now fast forward back to the present, the beginning of the story, where Ah Fong is leading the police to this scene. As we already mentioned, the apartment was covered in Hello Kitty memorabilia. Man Locke and the other two men were arrested and charged with manslaughter. Now why manslaughter, you ask? I mean, that's the lesser charge when compared to first-degree murder. Well, during the trial, Ah Fong testified against the three men in exchange for immunity, but even with her testimony provided, the remains of the body, they weren't sufficient enough to really prove how Fan had truly passed away. And so, the actual cause of death couldn't really be determined. However, they did conclude that she did die as a result of the entire situation. Thank God they had their heads on straight enough to figure that out. I just find it a little bit confusing, like if they can determine that she died due to this whole situation, being held captive and, just subjected to such terrible things and trauma, then why can't they use that to say, you killed her? Basically, she would be alive if not for you. So it's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's enough to say that you three are responsible for her death and you guys should be punished for it accordingly. The three men received life in prison with the possibility for parole in 20 years. So by now, that means some of these guys may actually be walking around as free men. Actually crazy. Now the judge who sentenced the men had this to say about the case. Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness. I think that's a pretty accurate representation of what happened. This case shocked not just the nation, but the world. And now, probably some of you. I'm not exactly sure what happened to Ah Fong, the young girl who came forward and helped bring these men to justice. But I will say, I do hope she's doing better. I can only imagine what it was like for her being subjected to that at 14 years old and having to work and date for a 34-year-old gang member. It makes sense why she was so desensitized to the rest of the world, because clearly she was living in her own. Especially considering the fact that she was seeing Fan's ghost literally haunting her and telling her to come forward and tell the truth. But again, like I said, let me know what you think about this whole situation and, Ah Fong, and if she, truly was a victim. I think she was. She was 100% factually was a victim in many ways, but in terms of taking part in the things that happened to Fan. Now, something else I found interesting, if you think about it, she was the same age as Fan was whenever Fan got kicked out of the orphanage. Remember, Fan was like 15 years old when she got kicked out of the orphanage and had to fend for herself and learn how to survive, and she ended up selling her body. Ah Fong is 14 years old and she's doing the same thing. And it's just tragic because I think it clearly points to a cycle that young girls face in many places of the world, where their only option is to sell themselves and end up with the wrong crowd. Anyways, that is where our story ends. I wish nothing but the best for Fan and Ah Fong, and I hope this case opened your eyes about important issues or helped you out in some way. Let me know what you guys think about this down below in the comments. Like I said, the entire case, I think it is the worst case I've ever read, so I'm sorry if some of you guys, were having a hard time listening or getting through it, but like I said, I hope you can take away something at the end of the day. That's all I, want. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, good night.